Bartholomew Kuma appearing just in time to save his daughter is one of the most satisfying post-flashback pages in One Piece. The composition of this page is defined by a thick, rounded curve, giving a feeling of sturdy defense. The way his arm and legs spiral out and jam into the ground show how he's bracing himself and will not fold. In my video on Zoro vs. Mr. One, I talked about how rectangles are the most sturdy, defensive shape, but rectangles still have sharp corners, a little bit of an edge. A rounded shape like this implies no capacity to attack, sort of like how Luffy's most rounded form, Tank Man, is the one that doesn't attack directly. Kuma is going to beat Saturn's rear end in just a moment, but in this moment, protecting Bonnie comes before all else. Chapter 1103 is full of great visual storytelling and paneling, so let's jump back to the start and look at how this confrontation was built up. The chapter opens up by using negative space to convey movement and resolution. By setting Vegapunk and Bonnie far apart, it implies an emotional distance, as Vegapunk doesn't understand her feelings just yet. Bonnie crosses this distance, and in the same act, closes the emotional gulf. The distance she moved is intangible, but it's still an object within the panel, taking up space. If this panel was centered on them, it wouldn't have the same impact. The trick of using negative space to show how one character moved toward the other is a common one in comics. But there's a lot more to this sequence than just that. While Bonnie moves, we're also zooming in, panel by panel, as we go from emotional distance to emotional intimacy. The initial distance between them is emphasized not just with the main panel, but with their close-ups on each side, on opposite ends of the page. And the sound effect for Bonnie changing her age is also a literal trail of her height as she moves. When we return to the present, we also return to a visual motif that was set up right before the flashback, Bonnie being held up in the air with a ring of Marines pointing guns at her. By bringing back this motif, the manga pulls us back to how we had felt, what we were thinking, before the flashback began. The image also has so much meaning baked into it. Bonnie is being held up like a sacrifice, and everything around her is targeting her. The composition of the page also directs attention to what matters, with both a diagonal line that takes it across the most important elements, and all of the lines from the Marines focusing the eye toward Bonnie. The overall triangular composition gives it a great readable structure. There's another follow-up on pre-flashback imagery and how the Straw Hats and Vegapunk are arranged below. Before, we had an interesting panel of them essentially boxed in. Here, it's taken one step further, with Marines arranged in between each one of the trapped protagonists, dividing them, like they're the bars of a jail cell, further emphasizing how our protagonists are not in a position of power. Speaking of positions, Kizaru's position is interesting here. He is on the other side of the page break from the good guys, given that he's not on their side. Yet he is angled in the same direction most of them are in, literally aligned with them. People are theorizing that Kizaru is the one who will give Luffy food. It could be a visual tie-in to that. There's one last thing I want to talk about here. Should this have been a full page spread? I will probably discuss this in more detail in the future, but short version. The common complaint that Oda should do more full splash pages is a little misguided in my opinion. Full splash pages and pages with a row or column of panels besides a large one are two different kinds of pages, better for different cases, and artists are free to make their own creative choices. So let's ask, why were those choices made? I think the reason this page has the row of panels below the large one is because they're all part of the same story beat. The characters are all in the same general situation without anything really progressing, which makes it kind of fitting to keep it all on one page. On the other hand, why is there a column of panels on the left? It doesn't really connect to what's happening on the right, maybe it just didn't justify a page of its own, but maybe Oda is just trying to get through things in fewer pages. Maybe the right half would have been better if it had this whole thing to itself. These are the kinds of things that we should be asking ourselves about, instead of just saying, full page spreads are better, always do them, never do this. Moving on from that, I like how Bonnie's attempt to punch Saturn is drawn. In general cases, a well-paneled wind-up for an attack should make the motion of the attack clear before it even happens. The way Bonnie pulls back her fist, the way the angle shows the distance between it and Saturn, accomplishes that very well. But it doesn't mean the attack has to land. The fact that the attack misfires is matched perfectly by how it bends away from the diagonal direction that the motion should be in. Bonnie's size in each panel is used to convey how powerful she feels at each moment. When she thinks she can attack, she commands panel space equal to Saturn. yet in each one after that she shrinks, and by the end of the sequence, she's practically a speck. Skipping ahead a few pages, the way Saturn is positioned is a great example of how drawing someone at an angle can make it feel like they're looking downward even if they aren't actually above the other character on the page. But forget that, Kuma is here, let's talk about him. Kuma is technically being looked down on by the Marines in this panel, as he's below them in a crater he just formed by landing there. Yet it still feels like he's dwarfing them, towering over them, because size in a panel is relative to importance and power. Below that, I like how the explosion appears first in the panel order before Saturn turning to see it. It reinforces how this is very unexpected to him. We zoom in on Kuma as he runs forward, increasing the feeling of intensity that he's plowing through the Marines. Yet what's interesting is that the directions that the eye follows aren't aligned with Kuma so much as they're aligned with the attacks that are hitting him. Attacks that are pointing in all sorts of directions, making it feel like Kuma is being knocked around like a pinball. By giving the focus and momentum to the attacks against him rather than to him, it makes us wonder if he's going to fall over, if this is too much for him. But, of course, as the smoke clears, the cliffhanger resolves by showing that of course he won't be stopped here. He is Kuma! Of course he is rushing forward, through and past the Marines. I like that we have switched from him running towards us to him running away, to sort of match that no, he is going straight past them. And I like how this little narrative, this question of whether Kuma can make it, is totally visual. If you look closely at Bonnie's pose, her arms are positioned the same way Kuma's are, as though she was running forward too. She is trapped in place, but in her mind, she is trying to run toward her father. Kuma's explosions dwarf Saturn, showing that his power is potentially greater. For the last while, Saturn has always had Marines at his side, as practically a visual signature for him. So I like how we're clearing them away, making him vulnerable for once. And it makes sense that Kuma wouldn't directly attack Saturn yet. It could still hurt Bonnie. Saturn slamming Bonnie down into the ground, painful as it is to watch, is paneled great, moving downward with the eye in a satisfying rhythm. By breaking it into two panels, it takes a continuous motion and turns it into something with two beats that makes it so you feel the impact as the second one hits. And with her on the ground, she is vulnerable to the attack Saturn has been consistently trying to use since before the flashback, piercing someone with a claw from above. The claw is arguably the most offensive shape, sharp and pointed in a very directed way, not all around, but at something specific. We are looking down with it from above, ready to fall down onto Bonnie. Yet Kuma's hand appears, facing against the claw, perfectly positioned to catch it. There is a question in this cliffhanger that I didn't even realize was there until I turned the page. I assumed that Kuma's hand would go between the claw and Bonnie and block it from hitting her. What I forgot is that Kuma's hands are not for fighting, they are for holding Bonnie. And only once Bonnie is safe will he strike back. I love the imagery of him grabbing the claw, taking that shape of offense, of attack, and stifling it. Taking something made to pierce downward, attached to a leg that is shaped in a way to literally wrench downward, and pushing it up, symbolizing not just this one moment, but how Kuma is punching up against the leaders of the world, not even out of ideals, but just to protect his daughter. The setup of the punch is a little unusual for Oda. Normally he would draw this from the side, so there can be a feeling of motion for the eye to follow. But he doesn't need to do that here, because the punch itself isn't in this chapter, so the focus doesn't actually need to be on setting up the motion. Instead, the focus is on how Saturn feels here. That's why we see it from his view, coming towards him, and then see the panic on his face as he realizes it's coming. That is about it for what I have to talk about for this chapter, but one more minute. Normally, I ask all of you to like, comment, and subscribe. I kind of have to do that on this website. Even though it's annoying, it works. And it has been working. I've only been doing this for a few months, and I am already close enough to 1,000 subscribers that it is basically inevitable that I get there if I just keep putting out videos. This is much faster than usual for new YouTubers. Thank you all for watching. But if I can ask a little more, one thing that I think is more helpful than just clicking buttons that tell YouTube's algorithm to boost me is just showing my videos to more people. The One Piece community is huge, and I think there are more people out there who would like what I'm doing if they just knew about it. If you know anyone who you think would enjoy this kind of analysis, I'd appreciate it if you could share my videos to them. Thank you. I hope you have a great 2024.